It happened 30 minutes before landing. Flight 1876 was beginning its descent into Washington, D.C., and most passengers had reclined into stillness, headphones in, eyes closed. But Mason Rowe, seated in 3A, was still typing, still editing the final slides of a that would move $8 billion by morning. He didn't notice the small figure standing in the aisle beside him. Not until a hand touched his elbow. He turned, half expecting a flight attendant. Instead, a child, a girl, maybe 7, stood beside his seat holding a worn, stuffed bunny. Her socks didn't match. Her curls were uneven. Her voice, though, was steady. "Sir," she said, looking directly at him. "Could you pretend to be my dad just for one day?" Mason froze. The sentence was quiet, but it sliced through everything, the hum of the plane. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't scared. She was asking. Behind the little girl, a voice gasped, "Lena?" A woman pushed through the aisle. Scrubs wrinkled from long hours. She knelt beside the girl, her voice apologetic and rushed. "I'm so sorry," she said to Mason. "She doesn't usually Nixon." "She's not talking to a stranger," the girl said. Mason blinked once. The mother stood gently guiding her daughter's hand. She spoke, trying to laugh it off. "We didn't mean to bother you." "What's her name?" Mason asked. Riley hesitated. "Lena. Lena Grace." Lena took a step closer to his seat. "Tomorrow is Daddy Day," she explained. "Everyone's bringing theirs. I don't have one, but you look like you might say yes." Silence followed. Even the flight attendant nearby paused, eyes wide. Riley's voice lowered. "We'll leave you alone. Thank you for your patience." But Mason said, "What time?" Riley blinked. 10, he nodded. "I'll be there." The plane dipped slightly as it aligned with the runway. Lena smiled. "Just for one day," she said again. Mason closed his laptop, not because he finished, but because something more important had just begun. That night in the penthouse overlooking Georgetown, Mason sat before 3 glowing screens, each streaming live data from the beta models of his company's AI program. Graphs flickered, sentiment charts bloomed, then dropped, and yet he couldn't begin to process what had just happened. He replayed the moment again. "Could pretend to be my dad just for one day." Not a plea, a proposition. It unsettled him because it felt honest. He clicked open a browser window, searched Washington City Elementary Parent Day, and there it was, 10 a.m. Classroom 2B. Guest welcome. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. The next morning, Mason arrived at the school at 9:57. No bodyguards, no driver. He wore a navy sweater instead of a suit. Still crisp, still controlled, but softer than usual. The receptionist looked up, blinking twice. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for Lena Grace." A pause. "She invited me," he added. The woman narrowed her eyes. "Are you her father?" He considered the question. "I'm filling in." He was set down the hallway with a visitor sticker and a paper map. Classroom 2B was already full. Fathers kneeling by desks, helping with coloring sheets, laughing as they fumbled through crafts. Mason paused at the door, and then across the room, Lena saw him. She didn't wave. "Cumber." She walked straight to him, took his hand, and pulled him inside. The teacher, a gentle-looking woman in a sunflower skirt, welcomed him with a polite nod. "Glad you could make it, Mr. Rowe." Lena said you were a businessman." Something like that. They moved through stations, glue sticks, storybooks, cardboard crowns. Mason fumbled with scissors. Lena watched patiently, occasionally correcting his grip like a tiny instructor. At the Play-Doh table, she molded 3 small figures. A girl, a woman, a tall man with glasses. She didn't say what it meant. Later, while the other children curled up for story time, the teacher asked, "Would any of our guests like to read today?" Before Mason could respond, Lena raised her hand. "This is my dad," she said. "Just for today." He froze. The room went still. Someone snickered. Another parent whispered, but Lena didn't notice. She handed him a crayon-covered book titled My Family is Magic. He took it with both hands, sat down cross-legged on the rug, and opened the first page. His voice was stiff at first, careful, but as the pages turned, something inside him began to loosen. By the final line, Lena was resting her head on his shoulder. "I like when families find each other," she whispered. He looked at her and realized she wasn't pretending, and neither was he. Mason had given dozens of speeches since that morning at the school, but none had stayed with him like Lena's 5 words. "This is my dad just for today." He remembered how she curled up next to him on the rug, how she looked up at him like he'd always been there, how she didn't pretend. She simply believed. For the first time in a long time, the memory of something didn't distract him. It anchored him. 3 days later, Mason walked through the automatic glass doors of St. Allora Medical Center. He told himself he was there for research. Technically, it wasn't a lie. His company's next AI model was meant to better interpret emotional cues in nonverbal children. Lena's case had fascinated him. That's what he told the team. That's what he told himself. But the truth was harder to explain. He hadn't stopped thinking about her or Riley. Riley Monroe was on her feet for the 5th hour of a double shift. Her scrubs were faded from too many washes, her hair pulled back in a rushed knot, her expression focused as she adjusted a child's foreline in the recovery unit. She turned when she heard someone clear their throat behind her and nearly dropped the chart in her hands. Mason stood by the nurse's station, still in that same muted sweater, but now holding a visitor's pass and looking completely out of place. "You're here?" she asked, blinking. "I'm interested in pediatric behavioral response data," he said quickly. "We're building a machine learning model for early detection in speech-delayed children." "Right," Riley replied. Her voice was polite, flat. "And you needed to collect that in person?" Mason gave a brief nod. "Some things don't translate well on screen." She crossed her arms. "So, you just walked into my workplace because of your AI. I also had a question," he said, his like about Lena. That stopped her. What kind of question? But before he could answer, a soft voice chimed in from the far hallway. "Mr. Mason." They both turned. Lena stood at the end of the corridor holding her bunny, her shoes untied. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't hesitate. She walked toward him, then reached for his hand. He froze. So did Riley. Lena had selective mutism, a rare anxiety disorder. She spoke freely at home, but never at school, never with doctors, never with strangers. And now here she was touching his hand, smiling. "Mason," she whispered. Riley's breath caught. She hadn't heard her daughter say a word to anyone but her in almost 2 years. "I brought you something," Lena said quietly, tugging his hand toward a nearby bench. From her backpack, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly, carefully, and revealed a drawing. 3 stick figures stood in front of a house, one tall, one medium, one small above them, written in bright orange crayon. "Home just for a little while." Mason looked at the drawing, then at Lena. Her eyes were calm, steady. He'd spent his life decoding emotion through data, but no algorithm could have prepared him for this. Later, Riley stood outside the unit doors, arms crossed, watching them. Lena sat beside Mason, showing him another drawing. She was talking now softly, shyly. "I don't understand," Riley murmured to herself. "Why him?" A nurse beside her said quietly. Maybe because he listened. 3 days passed. Mason didn't visit the hospital again. He told himself he had work deadlines, a board to update, numbers to hit. But the harder truth was this. He didn't know what to do with the way Lena looked at him, as if she had already decided he belonged there. It was Friday night when the call came. Not from the hospital, from Riley. Her voice was strained, tight with panic. "She has a fever. Hi, it won't break. She keeps asking for you." Mason was already grabbing his coat. Riley's apartment was small. 2nd floor, no elevator, barely insulated. The kitchen light flickered when he knocked. She opened the door barefoot, face pale. "She won't sleep," she whispered. "She's been crying on and off for hours. I've tried everything." Mason stepped inside without a word. Lena was curled up on the couch, surrounded by blankets, skin flushed with heat. She stirred when she heard the door, blinked, and then reached out. "Mason," she whimpered voice. He knelt beside her, touched her forehead burning. "I'm here," he said quietly. Her fingers found his, and didn't let go. For the next 6 hours, he didn't move. He sat beside her, whispering comfort, placing cool clouds on her forehead, listening to the small, broken sounds of a child fighting through fever dreams. Riley sat nearby, watching, not speaking. At 3:17 a.m., Lena stirred again. Her eyes opened, glassy and distant. Her lower lip trembled. "Don't leave me, too," she whispered. Like he did. Mason's chest clenched. He didn't need to ask who he was. He leaned forward, gently pulling her closer, wrapping both arms around her as if holding something precious and fragile. "No," he said, voice cracking. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Lena buried her face into his chest, and for the first time all night, she stopped trembling. Dawn broke slowly. The fever eased. Riley stood in the hallway, arms wrapped tightly across her chest, watching them through the cracked doorway. Mason slumped in the chair, still holding her daughter, his shirt damp with sweat, his eyes closed, but his hands still gripping Lena's, as if letting go was not an option. And in that quiet moment, she realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. This man, this stranger, was no longer pretending. He was staying. The fever broke just before dawn. Mason hadn't moved. Lena was asleep now, curled into his chest like a child who believed completely in the arms that held her. Riley watched from the kitchen, clutching a lukewarm mug she'd forgotten to sip. He looked nothing like the man she first met on that plane. No suit, no cold calculation, just a man, sleepless, unshaven, holding her daughter like she was something that could shatter if he let go. She didn't speak. She didn't want to break the stillness because for the first time, it felt like something in her life was holding still for the right reasons. An hour later, Mason gently laid Lena back on the couch. She stirred, eyes still heavy with sleep. "You stayed," she whispered voice. He nodded. "Of course I did," a pause softer. "I'm not like him." Riley met him outside in the hallway. "She'll be okay," she said. "It's past." She said something he told her in the middle of the night. Riley looked at him. She said, "Don't leave me, too." Her eyes dropped. "She remembers," Riley said quietly. "She was 2 when he left. I didn't think she did." Mason leaned against the wall. "She's smart. She remembers what matters." There was a silence between them. Not awkward, not cold. The kind that opens when 2 people stop pretending they're strangers. Riley broke it first. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Later that day, as Lena rested, Mason stood by the apartment window, watching cars pass below. Riley walked in behind him, quieter now. "You're not here for data," she said. "No," he admitted. "Not anymore." "Then why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something folded and worn. He opened it slowly. A photo, edges frayed, colors faded. A woman with warm eyes, a boy with a dimple and dark hair, caught mid-laugh. "My son's name was James," Mason said. "He was 6. He asked me to come to his class once. It was for a science project, building volcanoes." He paused. "I told him I had a meeting. I promised the next one." Riley said nothing. Mason kept looking out the window. That next one never came. They were hit by a drunk driver 2 blocks from the school. The silence deepened. "I didn't make it to the hospital in time. I didn't make it to anything that mattered." When he turned to face Riley, his voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "I've spent years building things that understand emotion, and none of them will ever forgive me for not understanding my own child." Riley stepped closer. "You think showing up now will make up for that?" "No," he said. "But maybe it's not about making up for anything." He looked down. "Maybe it's just about not walking away this time." In the next room, Lena stirred in her sleep. And for the first time since she spoke those words, "Don't leave me too." The man who once ran from grief stayed. It was a Sunday morning, quiet, except for the rustle of leaves against the window and the sound of cartoons humming from the TV. Riley was folding laundry. Lena was coloring at the kitchen table, humming to herself, carefree in a way Riley hadn't seen in years. Then came the knock. 3 short, impatient raps. She opened the door. Standing on the porch was Daniel Marks, a man she hadn't seen in nearly 7 years. His shirt was too stiff for sincerity, his jaw too sharp with judgment. He smelled like expensive cologne and courtroom confidence. "Daniel," she said startled. What are you doing here?" "I heard you're letting some CEO play house with my daughter," he said bluntly. "I want to see her." Riley stepped outside and shut the door behind her. "She doesn't know you. She's never even met you." "That's exactly why I'm here," he said. "She's family, Riley, and I intend to make that official." "What are you talking about?" "I'm filing for legal guardianship." The words landed like a slap. "You're joking." "She needs stability, not some corporate godfather who decided he cares because a child looked at him twice." His voice was calm, rehearsed. "You're letting your daughter get attached to a man who won't stay." Riley's voice cracked for the first time in years. "You left." "I wasn't ready." "She was too. She cried every night for months." Daniel shrugged. "I'm ready now." "No," she said. "You're not. You're running a campaign. You want a photo op?" That hit. His jaw twitched. "You can't prove that." I don't need to, she said, because she's mine and she's safe. For the first time in her life, she's safe. Mason arrived at the apartment that afternoon. Riley opened the door before he reached it. She had a visitor this morning, she said. The biological father of the girl. Mason paused. Daniel Marks. You know him? He was on a panel I once spoke at. Real estate guy. Wealthy, ambitious. He's filing for guardianship. Mason exhaled slowly. This could get messy, he said. It already is. Riley's voice softened. He doesn't care about her. He didn't call for 7 years. Step. But now there's press, and he needs a redemption arc. Mason looked toward the hallway where Lena's drawings hung on the wall. Crayon people, stick figures with smiling faces, one tall, one small, one in the middle who looked like her. We can't let him take her, Mason said. She's not yours, Riley said gently. Not harsh, not cruel, just real. You've been here. You've shown up. But legally, you're nothing to him. Mason looked at her. I'm not going to be nothing. That night, Riley stood by Lena's bed, brushing her daughter's hair from her forehead. Mommy, Lena said softly. Is Mr. Mason my real daddy? Riley paused. No, she said. But he's real, and he's yours. The courthouse hall smelled of polished wood and muted anxiety. Fluorescent lights reflected off the marble floor as dozens of spectators took their seats. Mason sat beside Riley, hand in hand, both dressed in somber dark tones. Across the aisle, Daniel Marks sat with a smirk that didn't suit the solemnity of the place. The judge entered. Silence settled like a weight. Judge, Miss Riley Monroe, Mr. Mason Rowe, we are here to consider the petition for guardianship filed by Mr. Marks. Miss Monroe, would you like to make a statement? Riley rose, studying herself on the podium. Riley, Your Honor, Lena Grace does not need a legal technicality disguised as a family connection. She has a mother who loves her, a man who shows up every day, and a home built on trust. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Daniel's smile faltered. Judge, Mr. Marks. Daniel stood, posture rigid. Daniel, biology matters. Blood ties matter. She has a right to her blood family. I accept responsibility now, and I will provide for her. Riley's jaw clenched. Mason squeezed her hand. The judge paused, reviewing documents, then nodded toward Lena's small figure seated beside her stuffed bunny. Let the child speak if she wishes. A hush fell. All eyes turned to Lena. Her mother gasped softly. Mason felt his heart tighten. Slowly, Lena stood. Her footsteps were small but certain as she walked to the center of the courtroom. The room leaned in. Lena voice trembling but clear. My name is Lena Grace. She held up a drawing. Crayon figures of her Riley and Mason, all smiling under a sun. I already have a dad. She paused, looking directly at Mason. I chose him. Her voice gained strength. I don't need someone who forgot me. I need someone who stays. Daniel's face turned pale. The courtroom fell silent, tears shimmering in Riley's eyes and in Mason's as well. The court recognizes the bond demonstrated here. In light of the child's expressed preference and her demonstrated trust in Mr. Rowe, the petition is denied. A collective exhale. Riley sank into Mason's arms. Lena scampered back, burying her face in his coat. Outside, the stone steps of the courthouse gleamed under a pale afternoon sun. Reporters scrambled, but for a moment there was only the three of them. Mason lifted Lena into his arms and kissed the top of her head. Mason, you were brave. Lena nodded against his shoulder. Riley looked at him, gratitude and something deeper shining in her eyes. You showed up. Mason glanced at Lena, then at Riley. I'm here to stay. They walked down the steps together, mother, daughter, and the man Lena had chosen, leaving behind the echoes of courtroom tension. In their wake was something more powerful. A family finally named, not by law, but by love. The courtroom was long behind them. But the weight of that day hadn't left Mason. That night, as the city shimmered under soft street light, and the world outside seemed finally still, Riley found him standing alone on the balcony of her apartment, looking out as if searching for something he'd lost long before. He didn't hear her at first. Mason. He turned slightly, his hands resting on the railing. I keep thinking about his backpack, he said quietly. Riley stepped closer. My son, he continued. James, her breath caught. I packed it the night before, Mason said, voice steady but low. He wanted to bring this volcano kit. There was baking soda everywhere. I told him we'd clean it up after school, but I had to leave early. Big pitch. Big meeting. He exhaled shallow and hollow. He asked if I was coming. I told him I'd be at the next one. You know what he said? Riley didn't speak. She just waited. Okay, Daddy. Maybe next time we'll build 2 volcanoes. His voice cracked then. Just once. I didn't go. The lease, my wife, drove him that morning. A drunk driver ran a red light. They never even saw it coming. He closed his eyes. I didn't make it to the hospital in time. I didn't make it to anything that mattered. Riley laid a hand on Mason's arm. You didn't choose to be too late. He shook his head. I chose work. I chose detachment. I chose silence. I thought distance was protection. He finally turned to face her. But when Lena whispered, "Don't leave me too," it broke something in me. He swallowed hard, and I realized I've lived every day since that accident trying not to feel, but she made me feel again. Riley looked at him then, not with pity, not with fear, but with something deeper, something steadier. Maybe you missed your moments with James, she said gently. But that doesn't mean you have to miss the ones in front of you now. Mason studied her, silent. You don't need to replace what was lost, she said. You just need to show up for what's still here. A beat passed. Then Mason nodded. He didn't need to speak. She already understood. Later, as Mason sat beside Lena's bed, watching her chest rise and fall with the rhythm of sleep, she stirred. Half asleep, she reached for his hand, eyes still closed. You're still here, she mumbled. His fingers closed gently over hers. I'm not going anywhere. At 9 a.m. sharp, the boardroom was full. Mason stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, eyes steady. Every screen displayed numbers, profit margins, adoption rates, machine learning predictions. But he didn't look at any of them. He looked at the faces. I know you've all seen the reports, Mason began. Projected ROI, risk analysis. Everything looks clean. He tapped the glass tabletop once, but that's the problem. Whispers stirred. 3 days ago, I watched a courtroom nearly send a 6-year-old girl back to a man who only saw her as a pawn because he looked clean on paper. He let it hang. That girl, Lena, she didn't fit any model. She has emotional regulation challenges. She failed every social rubric in the system. But in one moment, one terrifying soul-crushing moment, she looked at me and said, "Please don't leave me too." Mason's voice didn't shake. It cut. There was no algorithm for that. One board member cleared her throat. Mason, this isn't about emotion. This is a shareholder decision. He nodded. Then let's be honest about what we're sharing. Risk without context. Intelligence without empathy. He clicked the screen. A photo of Lena appeared. Her eyes bright mid-laugh. Tangled curls flying. She chose me in that courtroom. Not because of my title, because I showed up. Later that night, back in Riley's kitchen, Mason opened Lena's drawing from school. It was crayon sketched in crooked but unmistakable. A tall man with glasses. A woman with brown curls. A girl in a pink dress. The caption read, "My family." He sat at the table for a long time. Riley entered quietly. She asked if you could read her a bedtime story tonight. Mason looked up, his eyes glassed. But sure, I'd like that. I missed too many stories already. It was the school's family day. Lena stood at the front of the classroom, her tiny hands holding a cardboard volcano. The teacher asked who helped her build it. Lena glanced back, searching. Then the door opened. Mason stepped in slightly out of breath. Tie loosened, cheeks flushed from running. He held up a second volcano built exactly like hers. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "She told me to bring the backup." Laughter echoed, then applause. But Mason only saw Lena beaming. That night, back in Riley's kitchen, he stayed behind after dinner. The dishes were done. Lena had fallen asleep with a book still open on her chest. Riley tucked her in, then turned to Mason. Her smile was tired, grateful, guarded. "You didn't have to come today." "I know," Mason said. "But I wanted to be there for her," he paused. "And for you." Riley looked up. "I never got to be the man my wife needed. I never got to show up for my son," he said quietly. "But if you let me, I'd like to try again with you." Silence. Then Riley whispered, "You're already trying." Mason stepped closer. "Then let me keep showing up. Every morning, every mess, every moment." He kissed her. Slow, certain. No more pretending. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered. Inside, a volcano made of cardboard sat on the counter. Silent proof that sometimes love isn't loud. It just shows up. Thank you for watching the story all the way to the end. If it touched your heart even just a little, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more inspiring stories every day. because sometimes the right story finds you when you need it.